we are looking at Habermas's critique of Klein, and we had stopped here last time. So starting from here, he's referring to Klein, begins by defining the domain of argumentative speech. So, in argumentation, there is an attempt to transform something collectively problematic into something collectively valid. So, what is argumentation? Argumentation is given an exchange of reasons for and against something, and argumentation become, if a certain reason or counter reason is not convincing to the participants in the speech or communication, then that's something become problematic. And then argumentation can be an arena to resolve that collective problematic into something collectively valid. So if everybody is able to be convinced by what was or what had become problematic, then that problematic thing become collectively valid by drawing upon what is already collectively valid. So let us stop here and try to see what happens in argumentation. So let us picture a simple case of argumentation. So in argumentation, we have an exchange of reasons. Argumentation, we have an exchange of reasons. Among two or more than two participants. I mean, you can also imagine an internal argumentation where you divide your own self into two. But that's a special case of minimal argumentation, which occurs where at least two people are needed. So in argumentation, people exchange reasons. Reasons for or against something. So this something is your object of your argumentations. But those reasons make sense only those reasons make sense, and they are convincing or unconvincing based on background assumptions which are shared by all the participants. So you have participants in argumentation. So they raise reasons and counter reasons. But these reasons and counter reasons make sense, or they understand these participants understand those reasons, and they make sense to them. And based on that sense, they are convincing or unconvincing, because these participants share a background. So for example, they speak the same language, they come from the same social background or society or life world, where there is a broad agreement on things, and even disagreements can be understood only based on that broad agreement. So that background assumptions provide the context in which any argumentation occurs. Without that context, there can be no argumentation. We would have to start from zero, and that. So we would have to actually build that background in order for us to engage in any meaningful argumentation or any meaningful communication. So when people engage in argumentation, and when they put forth reasons and counter reasons, so either those counter reasons are convincing based on the background assumption, the background assumptions, which is a taken for granted background assumption among these participants. So as long as they are convincing for them in the context of that background, those arguments are unproblematic. Those reasons are unproblematic. Now, if for whatever reasons those reasons or some of those reasons become problematic, like they are not convincing for sufficient number of participants, then they move from being unproblematic to problematic. So they actually become part of the conversation. Before that, you were actually basing your conversation on that unproblematic assumption. But if one of those assumptions is become problematic, then they jump from background into foreground and become the foreground, and then they become the part of or the object of conversation, and that's how it continues. As long as there is enough background assumption which remain unproblematic, you have a chance, or you have an opportunity to continue your conversation, and you are able to resolve your issues based on that background assumption. And if one of them or some of them become problematic, you can resolve them based on the remaining unproblematic assumptions. Okay, and if some of the background, enough of the or sufficient portion of the background become problematic, then society is in a crisis of some sort. So that might require some sort of reform or change or even revolution, depending on the situation. So this is my understanding of argumentation. So some of it comes from Klein, some of it comes from Habermas, but that's my background understanding so far. So he begins by defining the domain of argumentative speech. The domain of argumentative speech, as far as we have just discussed, includes a few things. The domain of argumentative speech includes argumentative speech includes a few things. The first one is the participants more than two. Background assumption, that's important because that's where they are drawing their reasons from, and also so background assumption is also a repertoire of reasons, agreed upon reasons, implicitly obviously reasons, and they're drawing their conviction from there too. So those reasons are convincing to them because they share this background assumption. So this is sort of de-transcendentalization of Platonic world of ideas or forms. So you want to participants, your background assumption, and then you have an object you want to discuss, which is just because it's something new, or it can be something which was unproblematic and now it has become problematic and has come to forth. So it can be anything. So the object of your conversation or discussion, and fourth, your reasons for and against this objects, and five, your temporary conclusion. And the conclusion reached on a new agreed upon understanding of this new object, or an object which was agreed upon and then became problematic, so it becomes unproblematic again, or it can also lead to an impasse. So you are not able to resolve this, so these become like suspended judgments, and you might take them later on, etc., or you might just agree to disagree depending on the nature of agreement or disagreement. Okay, so this is roughly speaking our understanding of domain of argumentation so far. So he begins by defining domain of argumentative speech, that is Klein. In argumentation, there's an attempt to transform something collectively problematic into something collectively valid. Now, by drawing upon what is already collectively valid. So this already, we have discussed this already, but let's discuss using these terms. This is part of the domain of argumentation, which we have discussed already. So it's saying that in argumentation, there's an attempt to transfer something collectively problematic. Now, this is what I call the object of the discussion. This can be something new which was not discussed before, or this can also be something which was unproblematic and part of the background assumption, but for whatever reason became problematic. So it can be anything. So something argumentation, there's an attempt to transform something collectively. So this object, you enter into the argument because you want to, now this has become problematic. So you want to turn this something collectively problematic into something collectively valid. And what's the difference between something collectively problematic and valid? Because you give reason for and against this object, and if you agree, then this new agreement based on reason become transform this something problematic that into something unproblematic and something valid. So the difference between problematic become object of argumentation, and you give reason for and against, and these new reasons based on this, if this object, this become unproblematic, you agree upon, then this problematic object becomes or transformed into unproblematic object that becomes collectively valid. So validity is acceptance of something, or agreement on something based on reason. And since it is based on reason, this agreement, it is different from mere agreement, because mere agreement is just you agree on something for based on something other than reason. Because if you agree on something based on reason, then those reason can always be contested in the future, and this collectively valid can again become collectively unproblematic. Okay, so in argumentation, there's an attempt. To transform something collectively problematic into something collectively valid by drawing upon what is already collectively valid. That is background assumption. Participants in argumentation want to decide problematic validity claims by adducing reasons, and in the final analysis, these reasons draw their power to convince from a collectively shared unproblematic knowledge. Okay, we have already discussed this, but just to be clear about the text in our understanding of the text, we'll just take it up again. So participants in argumentation want to decide problematic validity claims by providing reasons and counter reason. So what's the difference between validity claims and reason? Because reasons are also claims, validity claim. So what's the difference? So validity claims or just claims are sort of your reasons which have become problematic or aren't shared by everybody yet. So in a sense, validity claims can be understood as reasons which have become problematic. So they have become the object of discussion. Because, for example, a claim that it is raining can be a reason for people who agree that it is raining. But if somebody questions this, then this becomes the object. So it's no longer a reason, it's a claim which requires reason in order to acquire validity. And so in that sense, problematic validity claims, so it is raining, has been transformed into a validity claim or reason into a problematic validity claim. And now it has become the object of your argumentation. And we decide about these problematic validity claims by providing reasons for the validity of this claim and defending those reasons against the counter reasons. And these reasons and counter reasons drive their force, convincing force, from the background assumption which is agreed upon or which is shared by the context, which is shared by the participants. That's what we mean by participants in argumentation want to decide problematic validity claims by adducing reasons, by providing reason and defending. And in the final analysis, these reasons draw their power. Convincing power. That is their power to convince from collectively shared unproblematic knowledge or background assumptions. So this much is clear now. Participants in argumentation want to decide problematic validity claims by adducing reason, providing reason, and defending those reasons against possible objections. And in the final analysis, these reasons which have been raised and which have been provided in favor of the validity claims draw their power. Where does their convincing power come from? It doesn't come from the Platonic domain. It doesn't come from some ideal world, but it comes from the shared world, which is called life world by the phenomenologist, and which is generally known as background assumption or taken for granted background assumption or the context. So and in the final analysis, and this is very important, and these reasons which have been provided, their power to convince from collectively shared unproblematic knowledge. Now, that much I think is enough for today, and we'll continue from here in the next session, inshallah.